Hi Australia, let's talk about the news. Specifically, how the news gets views and how that affects yous. Aussie news organisations have faced significant setbacks in recent years, thanks to the rise of independent media, foreign disinformation campaigns and crucially, Lisa Wilkinson leaving the Today Show. But the news's biggest enemy? The internet. The Australian government is proposing a new mandatory law that would force Facebook and Google to pay news organisations for web traffic. The mechanics are a little hard to understand, so think of it this way. Imagine I'm a sex worker. You don't have to laugh when I say that. You know what, you'd be surprised how many people are into neurotic white boys who talk out of one side of their mouth. Yeah, I don't know why it does that either. I feel like I'm constantly telling people secrets. Look at that. Look at that. How weird. Anyway, imagine for a second that I'm a sex worker and Google is my pimp. When people want to see me, they go to Google, who points them in my direction. Here's where it gets tricky. Imagine that Google also has a deal with Subway to promote their products while giving directions to me. So my clients don't just learn where they can get a foot long, they also find out where they can get a Subway sandwich. These new laws would give news organisations a taste of that sweet Subway money. Incidentally, Eat Fresh is also my slogan for sex work. Now, under these proposed laws, tech companies would need to negotiate with news organisations to work out a fair price for the use of their content. If they can't reach an agreement, the companies would go to arbitration, which is a fancy way of saying that a third party will decide on a deal for them. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, not according to the tech giants. Both Facebook and Google have freaked out over these new laws, with Google writing an open letter to its users opposing the bill. I understand Google is upset, but seriously, what did Facebook expect? Their company motto used to be move fast and break things. If you don't want to be held accountable for breaking shit, maybe don't put it in your company motto, Facebook. The saying is slow and steady wins the race, not break that tortoise's fucking kneecaps and leg it. Facebook and Google claim that they don't make much money on ad revenue from news. Google, for example, says it only makes about $10 million a year from its news service, but the companies claim that they'll have to pay up to $600 million a year in compensation. Now that's not exactly true. While it is true that news companies want $600 million in compensation, that does not mean that they'll get it. After all, there's a negotiation process built in, and it's not like Google and Facebook cannot afford good lawyers. Facebook and Google want to paint this as a David v. Goliath battle, but it's not. It's tech companies versus the government. It's a Goliath v. Goliath battle. Actually, since Facebook, Google, and the government are involved, it's more of a Goliath three-way. It's like a Galage à trois. Facebook and Google are also fear-mongering about data protection. See, under these laws, they'd have to hand over information about how readers engage with news items on their platforms. The tech companies say that this would give news organisations detailed access to your personal information. That does sound scary, but remember, we're being lectured to about privacy by Facebook and Google. That's like Ted Bundy telling you not to talk to strangers. Gee, thanks for the advice, Ted. Now, could you please let me out of your van? Facebook and Google aren't being truthful here. Although they would have to give news organisations some information, the data would have to be disclosed in accordance with the Privacy Act. Now, the Privacy Act is not a perfect document, but it's far from the Wild West in terms of legal protections. Under the Privacy Act, there's an obligation to anonymise and depersonalise information. Basically, despite what Facebook and Google say, you do not need to worry about News Corp knowing what articles you personally read. The data thereafter is broad, and it won't affect you as an individual. It's the difference between knowing that somebody farted and knowing that your Uncle Nick shit himself after standing up too quick. Both have the same basic information, but one version is significantly more embarrassing. Now, having said all of this, are these changes to the law a good idea? Well, yes and no. While it's true that Facebook and Google are being selective with their facts, there are genuine problems here. Firstly, neither the ABC or SBS are entitled to compensation under this scheme, and this comes on the back of ever-increasing funding cuts to our national broadcaster. So, while Rupert Murdoch gets richer, the ABC gets poorer. At this stage, ABC might as well stand for always be cutting. Mark my words, by 2050, they'll have cut the show 4 corners down to 3 and removed the A from Q&A to save money. Eventually, the ABC will just be one guy on public transport yelling about bushfires in China, and they'll fine him for not having a ticket, but he won't pay because he doesn't have any money. The denial of revenue to ABC and SBS is especially troubling when you consider the fact that News Corp accounts for almost 60% of newspaper sales. With this new ad revenue, Australian media would be placed in an even deeper Rupert Murdoch stranglehold. I mean, Rupert probably looks at the game Monopoly the way you and I look at The Sims. He's like, so you just do what you normally do? What part of this is meant to be fun? Under these new laws, you can't even register to receive ad revenue unless you're a news organisation with a turnover of at least $150,000 a year. This heavily favours pre-existing conservative news networks and threatens to increase their already outsized influence over Australian politics. Let's face it, progressives don't have $150,000. That's why they're progressive. If they had assets to protect, they'd be conservatives. Lastly, there's the issue of algorithms. A key part of these laws is a requirement for Facebook and Google to provide information about how their news algorithms work. Now, that's supposed to level the playing field by giving news organisations more insight into how their content is circulated. It would also allow them to alter the way they deliver their content in order to keep up with any algorithm changes. Under these laws, tech companies would have to give 28 days notice before making any changes to their code. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but Google last year executed over 3,000 changes to its code. Having to wait 28 days before making changes would cripple developers' ability to update their code in real time and could potentially weaken the security of these platforms. Imagine you're a bank and before you upgrade your safe, you have to tell all of your customers and give them 28 days to scope out the blueprints. Not only that, you also have to tell them what the code to the safe is and how the locking mechanism works. Now, I don't want to bank blame, but if you get robbed, I feel like that's a little bit on you. I mean, what if Russia hacks into one of these new companies and suddenly Russia has 28 days notice of Google's security updates? You might as well rename Google to Vladbook. When you type something in, it'll just say, "You know what we want you to know." If nothing else, we should be extremely careful about giving Rupert Murdoch, a man who promotes COVID conspiracies, Dictator Dan memes, and Andrew Bolt's demented face, the digital keys to the kingdom. News Corp journalists hacked into the phone of a murdered schoolgirl, for Christ's sake. The question is not, can they be trusted? The question is, how long will it take for News Corp to break the rules? It's like that old parable of the scorpion and the toad, except in this case, the toad is an 89-year-old man with a Viagra-fueled hard-on for dictatorships. Look, this is not a black and white issue. Tech companies do need to be held accountable for what they've done to the news media. People say we live in a post-truth world, but I don't think that's true. I think we live in a pre-regulation world. Our democracy requires strong news media, and these laws would go some way towards re-establishing that. But on the other hand, the exclusion of ABC and SBS from these laws, along with the data and algorithm requirements, that threatens to put even more power into the hands of the Murdoch press. These laws are a good start, but they don't go far enough in ensuring a healthy media environment in Australia. So what can you do? Well, for starters, please share this video. It's important to get the full story out to people, and I'm guessing Facebook will not let me boost this post. Secondly, write to your local member and post online with the hashtag #AdsForABC. Let's make sure that unlike our Prime Minister, these laws don't just work for Rupert Murdoch. They work for all of us. Look at that. How weird. Anyway, thanks guys.